what is the church? What is government? What do those two have to do with one another? Well, in this circumstance, I'm going to say everything, in all circumstances, really, because my feeling is that the church, well, I was going to say is, but the church was the government's main competition, main enemy, that kind of stuff. And I just want to put out some facts here and some things and make you, look into it a little more if you'd be so, willing. But anyways, this systematic, state-sponsored attempt to eliminate religion, militant atheism is not merely incidental or marginal to communist policy. So that's just basically saying that not just communist policies, communist, governments want to get rid of religion. Basically, it's not a side effect, but it's a central pivot. That was Lenin, compared religion to a venereal disease. So I'm just going to go through a few things here. Within weeks, the October Revolution, the People's Commissariat for Enlightenment was established to remove all references of religion from school curriculum. So in the years that followed, churches and monasteries were destroyed or overturned, turned into public toilets, I guess. Their land and property was appropriated. Thousands of bishops, monks, and clergies were systematically murdered by the Secretary of Services. Specialist propaganda units were formed like League of Godless. So Christian intellectuals and other people who followed religion, for the most part, were rounded up and sent to camps. This is under communist regime, communist authority. The Soviets had originally believed that when the church had been deprived of its power, religion would quickly wither away. When this did not happen, they redoubled their efforts. Stalin purges of 1936, 1937 sent tens of thousands of clergy. They were rounded up and shot. Under Khrushchev, it became illegal to teach religion to your own children from 1917 to 1980s. The more religion persisted, the more religious Soviets would seek new and inventive ways to eradicate or re-educate. So today, the churches and the Orthodox are alive and well and growing still. But I'm saying this not to say hurrah. I'm saying this to say the governments have always had an enemy, if you will, and that's been the church. That's been their main enemy for the most part. If you think of it this way, how do governments get money? They steal it. It's theft. It's taken. How do churches get money? It's given to them. People want to, and the churches in return benefit people and benefit society, benefit humanity. They were the number one go-to for the poor and the downtrodden, that kind of stuff. So here, I'll go through that. When the Declaration of War on Poverty in 1964, the nature of how poverty was addressed in this country was primarily the churches. That's what it was. From 64 and earlier, prior, it was the churches. You had helped the single, the widowed, the parentless children. It just helped. That's what they did. That was their main role. Not because they were given that role. They'd taken it upon themselves. They'd taken it on. So they were the main source for that. But it wasn't until the whole war on whatever that LBJ wanted to, Lyndon Baines Johnson, wanted to do, that he wanted to sort of intercede that or get involved with that and take over. And then the government started to take that role over. And did they do better? No. Did they convince people it was done better? Absolutely. It's propaganda. That's what they do. That's what they did. That's what they continue to do on that subject, on that note, and others. But anyways, so since then, however, the primary source for the poor has been the federal and local government. That's just how it's been. And for whatever reasons, the church has stepped aside or not been allowed to be involved as much. And maybe that's by force, maybe that's by threat, maybe that's just because they thought, hey, well, they're doing it now, we're not going to butt in. Whatever the case is, it's just not happening. So it's not being done as well and as good. And there's no strings attached when it comes from a church kind of entity. There wasn't, now there is. So it's very rare to find a faith-based organization organizations that help the poor and are not dependent on and regulated by the government. So what is that saying? That's saying, well, since now churches basically are a partner with the government. They're 501c3. They don't get their write-offs, or at least they don't think they get the write-offs without it. They don't think they get these things without it. They don't think they're recognized without this 501c3, which is a farce. But anyways, since then, however, the primary resource to the poor has become the federal and local government. I talked about that. So aside from the government pushing this, other people that have signed on to this 501c3 are also pushing this because they're believers. Even though they don't know the history of it, they don't know the backing of it, they don't know why it's there, they don't know how it was before it, everyone just gets behind it. And that's a problem, that's an issue. So in that sense, the government becomes the savior. The government becomes ideally as the one that's elevated, as the one that to go to, as the one that fixes all, as the friend of all, and the church steps in line. The church is just a partner with the government. And that's what this 501c3 IRS thing is. That's all it basically is. So when the preachers are silent, I'm just going to say this, preachers are silent, when the churches have made a pact with the devil, the state, quote unquote, then, or when they have played the role of Judas and sold out our God for 30 pieces of silver. That's a quote. So prior to 1954, there was no such thing as a 501c3. So 1954 and prior to that, there was no such thing as a 501c3. Nothing. All donations, contributions, gifts, etc., given to the churches were automatically tax deductible. Excuse me, under the Old English common law, known as the Law of Charities. Then in 1954, Senator Lyndon Baines Johnson, LBJ, sponsored legislation which brought churches under the new 501c3 section of the Internal Revenue Code of the IRS. So before that 501c3, all contributions, everything was tax deductible. It was all like it is today, for the most part, under the Old English common law, known as the Law of Charities. So, because you're not informed of that, or these heads of churches, these whatever you want to call them, weren't informed, the boards of the churches weren't informed of that, maybe they were, but it was too big of a fight or too big of a battle to go up against. They just signed on the dotted line. They just signed on the dotted line. Excuse me. So 501c3 was promoted as a benefit to the churches. The churches never bothered to look to the scriptures and previous law to find out that churches could not be sued. Prior to this, prior to being on the 501c3, to being a partner with the government, they could not be sued. It is in fact that today most of all of the churches who have been sued in a court action have been incorporated churches. They've been a 501c3 church. Those are the ones that have been sued. Period. End of story. So by submitting an application and substantial fee to the IRS for tax-exempt status, the church is requesting and accepting a government license to allow them to operate within the parameters and statutes of government regulation. That's in the paperwork that they signed. In other words, the church has become subservient to the government. Today it is estimated that fully 90% of the churches in the nation are 501c3, government-sponsored churches. 90% of all are government-sponsored 501c3 churches. So, since 1964, government can and does, to a point, control the churches. At least 90% of them. Hands down. No arguing there. Fact. And so, if you think of it, in the beginning I talked about how the church was the enemy of the government, was the main issue the government had, the main competition the government, whatever. Well, if you think of it this way, prior to 1954, absolutely, that was the case. Nowadays, 1954 to current, you don't need to defeat your enemy if you can have control over it. End of story. They're no longer the government's enemy. They can have control over it, and they do have control over it. Look what happened in the last couple years with all the shutdowns and all the not allowing these churches to be open because of, it doesn't matter, because they said so, period. That was it. Well, you signed on the dotted line. You sold your soul. You're a partner now. Whatever, we can take this away from you. We can throw you in jail because you signed on the dotted line. That's all I have to say about this. I really hope you look into this a little more. 501c3, look into it. It has a horrible history. And there's so much more beyond it than what is said and told people. There's no benefit to the churches or the people whatsoever. Period. None. Zero. Zip. But as always, thanks for watching. If you like this, hit the like, share, subscribe. And as always, stay vigilant for yourself, your family, your health, and protect your well.